Thank you so much. It's so exciting to be here. It's like coming here is a little bit like coming home or so on, because Olivia is always so welcoming. And the first thing I want to say is happy anniversary, PRC. This is a great anniversary, but not only I was reading on the plane, what PRC has done. Of course, we know what they have done, but when you read it, it's very impressive, and I think we really owe this to Olivia, this amazing work she has done, not just for research, but also for policy. And I have to say, for me, Olivia has been such an inspiration. And when I think of the initiative that we do, even at Stanford, I always say, we have to aim to be like PRC, or try to get as close, as good as possible as PRC. And then maybe to show you that I've become a little bit a pension junkie. When I thought of 70, I thought if PRC was a person, it would be like, they had to withdraw Social Security now, right? It would be the time, right? Not 62, but 70. So, right? So here is about that. So I wanted to present today something that is not a paper, but is more like a project, or more what has been some of our research, and I say our because a lot of the work that I'm going to present is work with Olivia, and try to get the lesson, I think, that we have learned so far in this body of research, which also involve collecting a lot of data. And I'm going to argue that measurement and data are really important and critical to be able to look rigorously and closely at this topic. And so I'm going to be very descriptive because some of this work is going to be a list of some of the projects that, or some of the lessons that I hope are starting to emerge from this. And I want to even go back actually to our big three and then very much talk about measurement and data. I know that you are already drinking more coffee when I said measurement and data, but I'll try to make it as relevant as possible, because I think this is how you can understand more and better. So I'm actually going to start with the big three for three main reasons, and I'm going to put them there so that you can see and remember what they are. What I want to tell you is because I can tell you how I met Olivia. So she actually claims she doesn't remember, and I now wonder whether I'm making this up. Now that I'm 62, like memory is a little bit frazzled. But I remember, in fact, very distinctly a dinner at the TIA Institute. And I actually sat close to Olivia, and we were discussing basically, saving decisions, pension decisions, and we start discussing this importance of financial literacy. I was visiting the University of Chicago at that time, and I've written a short article. So literally the next day, she called me and said, I have a possibility to add questions on the health retirement study. So should we do that? And so the big three were born in that way. But I wanted to mention a couple of things that you might not know, which is the fact that there are three is an accident, in a sense that we wanted to design, a lot of questions. So we wanted to maybe have 10 to measure financial literacy. And we were told you can have only 3. And I think the idea is this is probably crappy stuff, you can only have 3 questions. And that having 3 questions has shaped all what we did. Because having only 3 had forced us to think so hard about what do you ask, right, if you measure financial literacy. If you had 10, you could have asked, do you know the Black-Scholes formula to price options, right? But with only 3, what do you ask? And, if you think that, it took us a week to design this question, let me tell you that it took about 8 months to design these questions. And the first question we designed were very different than the big 3. And so, and we contacted a lot of people, a lot of experts, and so on, to actually design this. And the reason why I want to put them up is that I hope it's obvious that what we design are basically the ABC of personal finance. It's really the most basic concepts, and also describe in a certain way. There is a methodology behind all of this, but they are meant to be assessing basic knowledge. And this is important because I actually think sometimes the big three have been misunderstood, meaning what we were trying to assess is indeed if people had this basic knowledge. And this is why I feel, and we'll see that the result is that if people don't know this, it's a big problem because we are really assessing the ABC. Now, years later, because there were only three, what for us was a major disadvantage, because three was such a constraint, turned out to be a big advantage. Because almost every survey was able to add 3 questions. So what we did, we worked with central banker, with Department of Ministry of Finance, and many institutions around the world, and we were able to add the big 3 in several countries. So we could also understand how financial literacy moves around the world. And by the way, when we look at the data in the US, we were shocked. And so that's why we had to look at other countries, because frankly, I almost didn't understand this data. It was a really shocking result. So when we look at other countries, we call this project the flat world, the financial literacy around the world, but we discovered that the world is flat indeed when it comes to financial literacy, meaning it's very similar. Countries are very similar in many ways, and I'm going to describe in a moment. And not only we have been able to do so, but now we are back to actually at many countries, and so we are able to look at the data over some time, a 12-year span. We have been able to incorporate a lot more countries, Latin America, Eastern Europe, and for example, to understand inflation, to understand some of these features, it has been great to look at that global characteristics. And we have a special issue of the Journal of Financial Literacy and Wellbeing, where we are also looking at some of those evidence, in particular now that we have a high inflation environment. The reason why I put up this slide is actually to show you as well that now we have a journal dedicated to financial literacy and well-being, 2 important topics. And one of the reasons why I'm actually here is to really suggest and to recommend that you submit to this journal, because we definitely want your best work, and we are very much looking for good research on this topic. So what have we learned? The shocking result is just how low the level of financial literacy is. And this is, I think, what sometimes is missed or is not as appreciated, which is we are really measuring very, very basic knowledge. And we don't see this in the population, even in the population that has made many financial decisions. And this is true in other countries around the world, because I think it's part of this world which is changing, but we are not catching up. And so, often, and I just anticipate some of the things I'd like to say, potentially even in the discussion, that some people have argued, it's too hard to change financial literacy. We need to simplify financial instrument or so on. But in fact, you cannot simplify if people don't know what an interest rate is. You cannot go to that level of simplification. And, in a sense, we need, or I always say, financial literacy is like reading and writing. You cannot operate or participate to society if you don't have that basic knowledge. And this is, I think, what the big 3 have been telling us for the US and around the world. We are actually doing 2 projects, because now there are all of these psychologists that are asking us the alpha parameters, or we finally are now validating kind of the measure. When we did all of this measurement, we didn't have, in a sense, a lot to borrow from. And so, you'll see this paper coming up in the next few months. And also, we have been very happy to get support from the Institute of Consumer Money Management. I know we have one of our funders here. And we have actually also tried to teach people about the big three. So, because they are basic, you can actually teach people, and you can teach it in a very simple way. We did it via stories. And we have actually found that people learn even with these very, very short stories. So I think there is hope that we can teach at least the big three, if not more. And I definitely want to talk about the implication of this research indeed for teaching. Now, of course, we didn't have to stop here, and I'm very, very happy that we could collaborate with the TIA Institute now to collect a lot of data on financial literacy. In this case, we were not constrained to 3, so we went to 28, okay? Now you can even ask about derivative and futures, right? In a moment, I'm going to describe in this data, not only we have been able to collect the data, but we collect it each year. So in January, since 2017, we have been collecting data on personal finance knowledge. So I'll define it in a moment what it is, but this is also to show that more or less TIA has been such an important part of my life. I could meet Olivia, we could do the data. There are good institutions sometimes that can really work for you. So we have been collecting data each year, and each year we also write about the data that we collect. And in addition, each year we select a topic. Sometimes we oversample a group, sometimes we look at specific issues. For example, recently, of course, we look at inflation. This year we are looking at more retirement issues and retirement fluency. So, I'm going to show you today probably 5% of all the work that we have done or we could do. In fact, we don't have, in a sense, enough people to work, in a sense, with all of the data that we have collected. But here I'm going to focus just on the financial literacy per se, because I want to bring home, again, this point of, if you have 28 questions, right, what can you learn about financial literacy? And you can learn really a lot, but I'm also happy to say that these big three, in a sense, are a good proxy already for that basic knowledge. So sometimes you don't even need to go to 28, but of course 28 really help us to understand a lot more and better. So what are the questions we ask? We basically have 8 topics, and these are more or less the topic you would use if you are teaching personal finance. And we ask 2 or 3 questions for each topic. So let me just tell you, what is an example of a question. And here, yet again, you might actually see, I would say we are a little different in terms of complexity, but we are really capturing the type of decision that people make every day, right? And here, the scenario is, if you have $500 and you basically save early on with respect to somebody who save later on, who has more wealth, right? So we are not asking people to do very fancy calculations, right? But we see whether they can at least understand that saving early is important, okay? And you might see the same methodology as the big three, multiple choices, do not know. So if you think that in the US, we ask people to, of course, plan and saving for their retirement, unfortunately, the bad news is that about half of the people can answer this question, and also that basically 1 in 4 Americans doesn't know the answer to this question, okay? So yet again, right, it's hard to imagine that people who do not have that knowledge are going to make great decisions about their saving for retirement. I've chosen these questions because more or less is what we see in the data. So overall, half of the question are answered. So if you answer only half of a 28 question quiz, you get an F, not at Stanford, but everywhere. So, what we do see is that when it comes to financial literacy, right? Yet again, we don't see that we are doing well, even though this is the country with the most developed financial market, where people are in charge of their saving for retirement, where young people are asked to take up student loan to support their education. And unfortunately, this is not moving over time. If any, we see this downward, I wouldn't call it trend, but we see that it's not improving, and this is also what we see in other data. For example, the National Financial Capability Study, Understanding American Study, and so on. And if you look at the distribution, the bottom, right, the proportion of people who can answer only 7 questions is a substantial group of the population, okay? So what are the topics that people know the least? In a sense, what you see here is also what we saw, even though I'm not reporting it here, but if you look at the big 3, you'll see that what people know the least is risk. And if you look at for example, the questions about risk is always where you get the lowest proportion, so much so that together with Jason, we are also writing a paper on risk literacy. And risk and investing and insuring are the most difficult one. In many ways, that's what we should expect because it has to do with the second moment of a distribution. So it is a more complex concept, but the problem is we have to deal with risk, and risk is probably one of the most important components of our financial decision. Okay? Well, I talked about inflation in the big 3. Let me also say that we ask basically this question in the similar way here. And this is 2024, so this is actually data for January. So now that we have lived in a high inflation episode, people might actually know more, right? Or they might understand inflation more and better. Not really, right? And I think it's, again, connected with the fact that I don't think that people learn just by watching the world around them or just breathing the air. In the same way in which you don't learn the Maxwell law just by, understanding or understanding the law of gravity. So I also want to talk about 2 groups for which I'm very passionate about, and interestingly, these findings are there everywhere. One is, of course, the distribution across age, which we expect, even though it might be age or cohort, clearly the young are those who know the least. They are young, so they don't have the experience. But if you kind of take the age and you make it, for example, very young, 28 to 23, the college-educated one, the one we teach, then the knowledge is really, really low. And it is a problem because in the US, people get out of college with an average of $32,000 student loan, right? And if you don't know what an interest rate is, it's not a good thing. Also for us, because we have to keep them in our basement. So the second group I am going to talk about are gender differences. And I have to say, I put up this slide before I saw the program, but I'm very glad that we are discussing this. So let me tell you that the data show there is a gender difference in financial literacy. And if you look at the big 3, there is also a gender difference in financial literacy. If you look around the world, there is a gender difference in most countries around the world. And the countries which do not have a gender difference is because the level of knowledge is so low that you cannot distinguish. So, this is basically a global phenomenon. And in the TIA, we can do more. We can, for example, look deeper at some of those topics. And what I can tell you is there is a gender difference in every topic, right? Right, yeah, I'm glad I saw, right? Like, it really sucks. We, of course, and it's interesting, by the way, when Olivia looked at, for example, at the big 3 only, this was staring us in our eyes, but I think we saw this gender difference. We started writing about the gender difference when we did the global comparison. And we saw it was there everywhere, and at every age group, it almost also across income and education. So it's a very persistent thing. So what's going on here? So we looked in more details at this, and if you look at the questions, right, it's not that women are more likely to be incorrect, even though they are, but they are disproportionately more likely to say, I do not know. If you ask me, this is a beautiful result, because women do not know, but they know they do not know. So, they might be potentially a good, advisor or good planner or so on, right? So what we did, in other words, and I see this in my class, right? I mean, if I ask a question, the women don't raise their hand, and if I ask them and probe the answer, they actually do know. But the reality is that if they are not certain, they are not going to pick the answer. So believe it or not, we started this project almost 10 years ago. And so we involved the Dutch Central Bank, and we asked the big three, and then 4 months later, we actually asked the question again, and we took away the do not know. And so we force, in a sense, women to answer, and everybody, and then we ask how confident they are of their questions. And so having two waves, where you have, in a sense, when you say do not know, and then when I force you to answer, we were able to kind of develop an econometric model to basically assess how much of that gender difference is due to confidence. It's due to the fact that you know, but it's a probability distribution, right? You are not certain, and so if you are not certain, in a sense, you don't give me the answer, but you were kind of, you actually had a good level of knowledge. And so we estimated that around 30% of the gender difference is due to confidence. So this is important, for example, for when we do financial education program. I have changed completely, for example, how I teach my class and what I say in my class and how I treat students in my class. And also, we wrote a paper because even this lack of confidence is consequential. So because both confidence and knowledge are actually, for example, affecting participation in the stock market. And we call this paper Fearless Woman, to remember Fearless Girl, because indeed, there is in a sense, women probably are too afraid at a certain point that, and that being not confidence prevent them potentially for growing their wealth. But I'm setting this up to say there is really, we have to explain the rest. And so this is, I think, a very important topic because as you have seen, has a lot of consequences. Now, not only we are able to measure knowledge, but we also should measure behavior. And in the TIA GFLAC Personal Finance Index, we were not able to add questions. If you want to measure wealth, you need at least 16 questions just to measure wealth. So we have proxy for example, financial well-being. And let me indicate two. One of the measures we have used recently is the number of hours that people spend dealing with issue and problem related to their personal finances. And we have rated this, and this is a distribution according to the level of financial literacy. And also, we have asked how many of those hours are at work, okay? So the first result is that people spend an average of 8 hours dealing with their personal finances. This is how expensive, in my view, lack of knowledge is. And the people who are least financially literate, the one on the other part, spend a day and a half, potentially, dealing with their personal finances. And this is actually their reported hours. And when we asked them how many of these hours are at work, if they were lying, they still told us that 4 of these hours are at work, which seems to be a very high number. And this is, in my view, another reason why employer might actually want to consider why it is important to potentially offer some financial education in the workplace. And this is why often when we think of, what is financial literacy, what can financial literacy give you, is also the possibility to do something else than your finances. The second things that we have looked at, and I'm also glad that it was mentioned today, we look at this measure of financial fragility. The reason I'm reporting this measure of financial fragility is it allows me to say a few things. This is actually a measure that Peter Tufano and I kind of designed at the brink of the Great Recession to kind of understand, in a sense, how were the finances of people, right? And how much, in a sense, people were suffering, right, after this great recession, which has really depleted their resources. And this actually question is able to capture really the state of the balance sheet. So I'm not going to say a lot why, but it's a very good question in a sense to characterize not just your asset, but also your liability. So this is actually a proxy for having low asset and being highly leveraged. So it captures both parts of the balance sheet. And so if you look at the people who are fragile are people who could not come up to $2,000 or probably could not come up to $2,000. I'm taking these questions because this is not potentially a decision that requires very fancy calculations, right? So this is the simplest, in a sense, decision, but it's the decision to put a little aside, right? So you have something to face the shocks. And the result in 2024, you see that somebody mentioned today that, for example, the group of people who had scams was only 10% of them were fragile. It was a surprising result because in the economy, about 28%, or about sometime 1/3 of the population is financially fragile. This is important to show that, the fragility, by the way, of Americans was incredibly high after in a sense, the collapse of after the Great Recession or the financial crisis. And this is, I think, a really striking number, which I think really tells us how much we are suffering or how much that crisis affected us. The other thing is, if you look at 10 years after the recessions, and if you look at 2018, 2018 was 10 years after the economy was doing very well. So the stock market was doing incredibly well, unemployment was very low. In fact, 1/3 of Americans would not have been able to face a $2,000 shock. When you look at this, this is the beginning of the pandemic, right? And if you imagine that, like the economy was going to shut down, 2 months later, and people couldn't even face a small shock, like let alone a big one, I think it really speaks of the fact that even the economy does well, like it doesn't lift all boats, right? And I've chosen this because you can say, look, here financial literacy doesn't matter. It's all income, it's all other decisions, and so on. So I'm actually going to show you that, in fact, it does matter, and it matters quite a bit. Here is a very simple kind of regression analysis that I'm reporting. I'm not going to argue that this is, like the JPE paper, but even when we look at a more exogenous measure than financial literacy per se, and this is also a project, we have written basically probably 10 papers on financial fragility. I wanted to report this one because we published this in the Journal of Accountancy. I cannot tell you how proud I am to have published in a Journal of Accountancy, and I have to confess you that I love accountants. They are like so much easier than economists. So, in addition to this, we're actually collaborating with a team of accountancy because, in particularly for doing financial literacy and the personal finance, I think this is really where we can learn a lot. So, we are spanning our reach to a lot of other fields. Let me summarize briefly because I want to turn about the policy implication. I've probably spoken too long, but maybe I'll just speed up now. So what I think and I hope I have shown is that the level of financial literacy is simply too low. It's too low for people to be able to make even simple decisions. Given the type of decision we have to make today, I am absolutely in favor of making changes in policy, in having a really great regulation, having great financial instrument, and so on. But people need to know what an interest rate is. They need to be able to do a 2% calculation, and they need to know about inflation. If they don't do this, you cannot sell them almost any instrument. And you cannot simplify this instrument enough. You have to shut down the system and do it for them. So in this world where things are so complex, I think we need, in a sense, to increase the level of knowledge and acknowledge as well that one size doesn't fit all. So what are the implications for teaching and for policy? And this is where I wanted to call this talk Why I Teach Personal Finance, because that's exactly what I've been doing starting in 2010, actually at GW. So we started a course on personal finance. I have discovered that actually starting a new course is more difficult than becoming the president of the United States. But we did it. We were able to start a course. We started as a pilot for accountants. These are great students, actually. And, we do it in the most rigorous way. We present, the statistics about the PFIN index. We present a lot of the research. We do a lot of application. And this course has become extremely popular. Not only, but we have a mission now to extend this personal finance to actually every university and every college. So we have a project at Stanford. This is the third year. We are organizing a teaching personal finance conference. I know you have never been to a conference where they teach you how to teach. Well, finally there is one. And the reason why we thought it is important is not that because we are not able to teach, but because this is a new topic and we really want to learn from the people who have done it. For example, before us, a lot of community colleges have been doing it. And we really wanted to understand what's the best way to teach it. And the reason why we're also doing so is because Stanford started this big initiative, which is called the Initiative for Financial Decision Making. We got a big, big gift. And it is a collaboration with 3 institutions, the business school, the Stanford Econ department, and the policy school. And if I had to describe it, we would like to change the conversation about money in the US. That's what we would like to do. Make money a topic of the conversation. Because the reality is this conversation goes on in the family where people are rich and educated, and it doesn't go on instead in the family where people don't have this knowledge, and this has enormous consequences. So, as we talk about so many other topics, it's time that we change this conversation about money and that it becomes, one of the many topics that we deal with, so we don't have to spend a day and a half dealing with our personal finances, but we could have a good and better relationship with our money. We are going to be launching soon, so I hope you can follow this work, and in particular, I hope that if some of you are teaching, as for example, here at Wharton, that you become part of this network that we are creating. The other thing is that finally we have been able to reach the policymakers as well. We have written a lot of policy work and tried to bring it to the policymaker, and I could not believe, but finally, last February, we were in front of 27 central bankers and 27 Ministry of Finance, including in the central banker, Christine Lagarde, and some of the other people. I thought I would pass out. And we talked about financial literacy in front of all of these people. Finally, they decided to have as a topic of that discussion financial literacy. So we flew to Belgium. It was the Belgian presidency who decided this, and just 2 weeks ago we hosted the European Commissioner, Commissioner McGuinness, which has been a very strong proponent of financial literacy. Why are they proposing financial literacy in Europe? Because of the Capital Market Union. They realize that if you want retail investor to invest in the market, you have to have some knowledge, and when you look at the evidence in Europe as well, as we have also documented, that knowledge is simply too low. But the things I'm most proud about is the work I've been doing for Italy in designing the national strategy for financial literacy. As you can imagine, everything that is done in Italy is very challenging. In my 6 years at the Ministry of Finance, I have changed minister 6 times. So every year I had a new Minister of Finance, and we restarted almost, now we learn how to do it. I think I understood that Italian politics is basically impossible, but we were at least able to support a law which passed last year to make financial education mandatory in school in Italy. And believe me, that's not a small task. And I also think there as well that I think we have tried to change the conversation about financial education. There were a lot of pushback about financial education, and I think the tide has changed, probably because of many other considerations that the work of this committee, but certainly that's very important. And I know we get many awards and many potentially satisfaction. For me, one of the things that was unique is, and that's why I'm reporting this photo, this is actually the meeting with the President of Italy, which is President Mattarella, which is our hero in so many ways. If you deal with Italian politics and he has to sit there for so many years, believe me, this guy is a saint. But it is indeed our hero, and so it was very special to be able to meet him and tell him about the work of the committee. Let me conclude by saying, that today, maybe if I want to bring you back in 2002 when I met Olivia and we started measuring financial literacy. Well, 20 years later, we have a GL code for financial literacy, is G53. So we can consider financial literacy an official field of study, and I hope it is because also we have measurement, and so we could describe what the problem is. And it is because we have a journal, and so there can be more research to be done, and so we can understand more about financial literacy. And if you want to read a little bit the summary, Olivia and I were asked to write a summary of this research for the Journal of Economic Perspective, where we literally summarize what I've almost said now, and so it gives you a little bit of history of what we think we have learned so far and what can we do, and certainly also as academic what we can do. And I want to leave you with this image. When people ask me what is financial literacy, I think the way I would describe it is like water in an ecosystem. All of the ecosystem is composed of many parts that have to work together, but you need the water to be able to grow and flourish. Thank you very much.